In 3 months' time, you'll be voting at this year's general elections. That's if you bother to show up on polling day. You see, last time around, more than 1 million Kiwis didn't. That's a huge number, and it has the potential to change the outcome of an election. This week on Street Stories, I'm looking at the role of civics and why people should know about voting and elections.
Left off. Desperate, divided and delusional.
Tinkering and the same old, same old.
Then we're going to boycott this parliament for the time being.
And I suggested if you listened, you could have heard it.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your parliament. Unless they're high on the party list, many of these people are only in this debating chamber because you put them here. Parliament can involve a lot of shouting,
would care to listen instead of ranting. She might learn something.
a lot of bickering,
If you want to listen to the answer, then just sip it, sweetie, I'm getting there.
jokes and laughs.
Slightly intimidated, Mr. Speaker, by Ms. King's excitement over my recent customary dress, but Mr. Speaker...
This is where decisions are made that will affect you by people representing you. Under MMP, every 3 years New Zealanders vote for their favourite political party and the person they want to represent their electorate. Debate and decisions in local and national politics often provide talkback radio host Chris Lynch with material for his show. It's the decisions Christchurch's MPs and city councillors make that Chris talks about, and it's those decisions that get people riled up.
A lot of the times it's about EQC issues, it's about insurance issues. At the moment it's about the floods. Everybody's got an opinion on what to do with New Brighton, so it's a range of issues.
Around 30 people call Chris between 8:30 and 11 on an average morning as he talks about our ever-changing city.
One idea, and it's a good idea I think, a coveted fruit and vegetable market in the central city of Christchurch, perhaps somewhere like Cathedral Square. What do you reckon?
The topics don't always gather a positive reaction from the callers. When Chris talked about an episode of Street Stories exposing a mother pimping out her 17-year-old daughter on Manchester Street, callers were outraged.
My job is to facilitate people who have issues and concerns. I don't see it as complaining. It's their right. It's more of a democratic process to talk about the issues affecting them.
When it comes to topics like whether the council should raise rates, whether schools should be closed or assets sold, callers always have an opinion about the decisions their representatives are making. What I want to know is how many of those complaining callers bother to vote.
I think our audience is very knowledgeable, they're very political, and sometimes I have to see through the political spin when you get a talkback caller, and if their call is politically motivated, I'll cut them off. Generally speaking, because this is not an election vehicle for people. It probably will become that eventually, but I try to stay clear from that. But I do think our audience is politically savvy, and I do think the majority of the listeners of ZB probably do vote because they're concerned enough to phone up a news and current affairs talkback show. Therefore, they're probably concerned enough to want to either make change or stick with the status quo. So I believe they probably do vote, yeah.
Despite election statistics showing that 1 million New Zealanders don't vote, I've been hard-pressed to find anyone willing to admit they can't be bothered going to the polls. So why aren't the 1 million voting? Perhaps in Christchurch they've been put off by what happened to Environment Canterbury. The national government was voted into power in the 2008 general election. 2 years later, they sacked Canterbury's regional councillors. The government said the councillors had mismanaged the region's water supply. Remember these scenes? Protests during the councillors' final day as the people's elected representatives. The government then appointed commissioners in their place. Was the ill feeling it generated worth it? The government is happy with their work. Even members of the opposition agree. The commissioners are achieving results.
I don't have any problem with the individual commissioners or the work that they are doing. That is not the point. What I am concerned about, and what thousands of Cantabrians are concerned about, is that we don't have a democratic right to vote for them.
April marked 4 years since Cantabrians lost their right to choose the people representing their region. A much smaller crowd than the protests of 2010 swarmed Cathedral Square to mourn the loss of democracy at Ecan. In what was almost a funeral procession, a wreath was placed next to a stone cairn built at the same time the councillors were sacked. Its stones are from rivers throughout the Canterbury region. Green MP Eugenie Sage was one of the 14 councillors sacked by the government more than 4 years ago.
What the cairn is about is people wanting a say in their future and the future of the management of our rivers and aquifers. We should have got the vote back by now. The emergency is long since over. People need a vote.
What's interesting about what happened to Environment Canterbury councillors is that elected representatives were sacked by other elected representatives. But it was Cantabrians who elected the councillors. So what right did the government have to sack them?
The democracy has been taken away from Christchurch, no question about it. If there's a change of government, then Cantabrians will get their democracy back. If there's not, then they've got Jerry Brownlee.
The Green Party's promising to remove the commissioners from Environment Canterbury if elected to power.
Democracy will be restored to Christchurch, in particular to the Regional Council. But more than that, in terms of the rebuild, we will take a partnership model instead of the dictatorship model of Jerry Brownlee and John Key.
However, the way the polls are looking, the Green Party might need the help of the missing 1 million voters to get there. Every political party in the country would love that group of people to vote for their particular party. The Electoral Commission also wants this large group of non-voters to participate in the elections.
As a country, we're actually really well enrolled, generally speaking. We are around about 92%, 93% enrolled. That generally, heading towards an election, will increase to around about 95%. So we're actually one of the best enrolled countries in the world. I guess the worldwide trend for voting turnout, however, is on a decline.
However, a University of Canterbury senior lecturer who's researched election voting says that the missing 1 million voters aren't likely to make a difference, even if a good portion of them did show up at the polls.
Well, I think that it's hard to make a good case for going out to vote if your intention is to change policy or change the government. Your chances of changing the election outcome are pretty slim.
He says a voter's chances of affecting an election outcome are about the same as winning lotto.
A lot of explanations have been raised for why people go out and vote, and they'll often come down to sort of feelings of civic duty, or that people do it as a way of expressing themselves, and that's all fine. People get consumption from those kinds of activities or consumption benefits. But if you're doing it thinking that you're making a difference or that you're going to show the government who's boss, well, you can show Lotto who's boss too.
Some of the voters I spoke to shared Dr. Crampton's view.
I just feel like one vote won't really make a difference.
However, the Electoral Commission wants all eligible New Zealanders to vote this year.
A lot of people think their vote doesn't count, but it's really important that you do have your say.
National Minister and MP for Christchurch Central, Nicky Wagner, can really highlight this point. At the 2011 general election, there was a tie in her electorate on election night.
I was even with the other candidate. So one vote made all the difference. And so when young people come to me and say, oh, vote never counts, I say, yes, it does. 47 people made the difference in my campaign last time.
Despite taking a strong interest in politics, Dr. Crampton hasn't voted since 1997. While political parties might be targeting the missing 1 million, he says it's not in a voter's favour to have more people hitting the polls.
But if no one voted, then it'd be different. If nobody voted, then I'd really consider going out to vote. At current levels of turnout, it's current levels of turnout that mean that your vote really doesn't matter. You've got a really small probability of changing the outcome where lots of people are voting. But if few people were voting, then you'd have a much better chance of changing the outcome. And in that state of the world, I'd consider voting.
Coming up, Christchurch's political parties are starting to launch their campaigns as they try their very best to claim a portion of the missing votes at this year's general election.
Without their participation, they're not having an influence over the shape and direction of our city.
It's a Saturday morning, more than 3 months out from the election, and Nicky Wagner's out with a team of young Nats. Parliament's newest minister outside of Cabinet is vying to keep his seat at this year's election.
Well, I always like talking to people and door knocking. I enjoy it, and I have young Nats who come out with me, and we have been doing it even not in election time. I think it's important that any MP is well in touch with the people in their communities, and door knocking is a great way to do it. You get to hear and see everything.
After 9 years in Parliament, Nicky Wagner was at first hesitant about standing again. Electorate boundary changes had removed some of the more affluent streets out of her electorate, but now she's pushing forward. She's planning to win this election.
What's your strategy for the Christchurch Central seat this year?
Just to continue what I've been doing ever since I've been an MP, but particularly since the earthquakes, trying to represent the people of Christchurch in Wellington, trying to link up and make things happen.
Presently, 2 other heavyweights stand in her way. The Green Party has put up David Morehouse to take her on. This is the man who lost to Labour's Puto Williams during last year's Christchurch East by-election. Newcomer Tony Milne is also hoping to steal Wagner's seat. We find him on a prominent street corner on the opposite end of the electorate. With a small band of supporters, he's getting his message across during peak hour traffic.
Central City has been completely mismanaged by the government, so people are really concerned about those issues, and Labour will provide solutions and answers for all of those issues.
Both National and Labour are desperate to attract the missing 1 million voters. And out of that 1 million, the youth vote could be the key for these parties.
Young people could make the difference in terms of who becomes the government. And young people participating and voting is important regardless of who they support.
It's really important to keep young people engaged in politics. In a lot of countries, the drop-off for voting, particularly for young people, is increasing. Young Nats are great because they engage, they meet the politicians, they know what's going on, and they can talk to their friends and their mates, and it just makes people more aware.
Christchurch electorates are notorious for having a high percentage of non-voters. More than 17,000 young people are yet to enrol. Tony Milne believes young people should have a say in what's happening in Christchurch. He's urging them to make their voice count.
Without their participation, they're not having an influence over the shape and direction of our city. And it's young people that are going to inherit the city, so they should be having a role to play in the debate and the conversation about our future.
The most politically engaged youth tend to be the ones holding the signs or knocking on the doors for Christchurch's MPs.
I think for a lot of the youth that are already involved, it's because they see that they do have influence with the party and they see that they can make a difference, that their voices are important. Trying to communicate that to other young people to make them really realize that that politics is relevant to them and that their voice matters would be a big achievement and is something that we're striving for.
The Young Nats are also conscious of increasing the youth vote. Throughout the country, the group has more than 5,000 members. Like the younger members of Labour, this group is happy to give up their time to help campaign, despite politics being the last things on some of their friends' minds.
Fundamentally, they sort of appreciate what we're doing, and it's like them, they go and play their rugby. I come out and do this because I think it's sort of the right thing to do.
Elsewhere in Christchurch, the city's Young Greens are meeting to discuss this year's campaign. One of the party's youngest MPs, Gareth Hughes, is in town to help inspire the youth.
And while I'm no longer the youngest, I'm still the youngest looking, I think.
He says if young people put their mind to it, they can make a difference.
Well, youth are a significant percentage of the population, and ultimately it's the House of Representatives that should represent all of us. MMPs helped, but I think it's important that young people realise they have an incredible amount of power, and if they enrolled and voted, they could see better policies aimed at young people, helping reducing the student loan burden.
19-year-old Cameron Russell is one of those who've turned up to hear from Hughes. He has only recently signed up to the Greens.
There's this perception of the Green Party that they're all sort of hippies and sort of crazy people who have tinfoil hats, but in reality, they're people who have a strong hold on what New Zealand really needs.
Claire Waghorn-Lees organised this event. She's been volunteering during campaigns for the past 13 years.
I feel like the youth wing of the party have had some really great involvements, more than just a cog in the machine, but we are all part of the same team.
Tony Milne's campaign manager is also relatively young. She's 27 years old. And talking to her, it almost sounds as though she's reciting the party line.
Politics is something that's always interested me, but it's really great to be involved in a campaign like Tony's, because Tony really sees the strengths in people. He treats every person as an asset, and I just think, imagine if we had a government like that.
Thousands of young and not so young volunteers will join Labour's MPs and candidates in campaigning this year.
Are you guys just cogs in the party machine?
I don't think so. Because to say that we were cogs would be to deny our autonomy. And you've got a lot of really bright people from really diverse backgrounds that are all contributing different things. So if we're cogs, we'd have to be really malleable. We're like changing the shape of the machine and things like that.
The youngest sign waver is 22 years old. Every week she works up to 10 hours for the Labour Party, and like the rest of the volunteers, she isn't paid for her help.
I just believe that we have the vote and we need to use it, and we need to really encourage our youth to go and vote. And I think Tony, being a younger candidate, is a great way to get young people more involved.
What makes a young person give up hours of their spare time to help someone else get into Parliament? The Young Greens' newest member is gearing up for this year's election. He's willing to help out however he can.
Lots of my friends aren't into politics, so they sort of just think I'm a bit crazy.
So I think everyone asks whether you sign up to become a politician, and the reality is we don't. We fundamentally believe in the way the National Party is leading the country and the principles they stand for. You never rule it out, obviously, but I wouldn't say that I'm going to go and sign up to be a candidate at the next election.
But what's in it for the volunteers?
The great thing about being involved in a campaign like this is that I really feel like our team is a part of a movement. And so no matter what happens on September 20th, there's already a lot of momentum behind that and a lot that we have to be proud of and to continue working towards.
Nationwide, it's estimated 211,000 people under the age of 25 didn't vote in the 2011 election. That's more than 5% of the New Zealand electorate.
I think it's the responsibility of every political party to be engaging for youth, to take responsibility for that low voter turnout and make sure that we are speaking to youth, making politics accessible to youth.
Coming up, why aren't these people voting? We visit the Careers Expo to find out.
Who's the head of Labour?
Helen Clark.
Should you guys be voting, do you think?
Probably not, no.
More than 9,000 teenagers are pouring through these doors over 3 days to learn more about what careers are on offer. The Electoral Commission's targeting every potential voting walking through the doors.
We will usually enrol between sort of 5 to 600 people coming through, so it's a really important event for us to be able to sort of connect with those young people.
Most of these students are aged between 16 and 18. First-time voters Georgia Thomas and Mary Goulding have just signed up to the electoral roll. They're looking forward to voting come September.
As soon as I turn 18, I have that responsibility, I guess. I've kind of been looking forward to it for about 2 years. We want to have a say in who gets to run our country.
Many of the people I spoke to couldn't wait to vote.
I got really excited when I saw the thing in my mail. I was like, ooh, I get to vote this year. I thought it was really cool.
How knowledgeable are these guys when it comes to politics in Christchurch, do you think?
It's really surprising. There's a lot of really politically aware young people.
But that's not what I discovered when I started quizzing Christchurch's future voters.
Who's the head of Labour?
Helen Clark.
John Key? No, he's national.
David Cunliffe. Is that right? Yes.
Who's the head of the Māori Party?
Winston Peters. No. I'm not sure, but I know it's not him. I'm not sure.
Should you guys be voting, do you think?
Probably not, no. Not yet.
Cameron Russell says many of his friends don't know who New Zealand's political leaders are.
Most people think that John Key's the President of New Zealand, not the Prime Minister. So, in terms of politics, I think this is the worst that's ever been in New Zealand in terms of youth participation or young people, but yeah.
These are the worst fears of Dr. Crampton. He'd rather these young people didn't vote if they aren't interested in politics.
The problem that we really get is because you have so little chance of changing the outcome of an election, people put very little time and effort into thinking through the consequences of policy, and that worries me a lot. I would far sooner that people who have no conception of how policy affects outcomes and are just voting based on which team they want to be cheering for, it's better that they stay home.
However, as we saw earlier, the youth engaged in the political parties do want to make a difference for what they believe in. Despite the students' lack of knowledge, back at the Environment Canterbury protests there were a number of young faces and they all knew what was happening.
Why do you think it's important youth have a say?
Well, because they're going to be around in 50 years. People who do vote aren't going to be around in 50 years. And the policies, a lot of them actually affect them. The changes made actually affect them, from student loans to benefits that you can no longer get. You get paid less for being a youth now. If youth don't vote, then they're kicking themselves in the balls.
Youth don't really have that much of an interest in politics or irrigation or anything along those lines. I'm one of the minority here, so yeah, I quite enjoy politics, but most people don't.
So while those two might be part of the minority that are taking an interest, what's putting off the rest from learning about politics? Gareth Hughes has a theory.
When you tune into Parliament TV or go to Question Time, I think young people are put off by the petty point scoring, the partisan politics. They want to see solutions. They want to see real debates around the real issues. They want to see MPs working together.
The Electoral Commission will encourage any young person wanting to vote.
When it comes to youth voting, Parliament is made up of a number of representatives of the community, but if there's a voice of that community that's missing, that's a real shame.
The rules of democracy mean it's your choice whether or not you choose to vote. However, as you've seen tonight, political parties and various organisations will be campaigning pretty hard for you to participate in the elections this year. Whether or not they do manage to get that missing 1 million remains to be seen. We won't know until this year's election is over. And that's this week's Street Story.